Hi, I'm Seamless, and I'm here today with ADSR sounds to help you out and run you through how to use FL Studio to do just about anything you can possibly want. But in this case, we're going to be doing about how to make a track. I hope y'all are doing good today. I hope you're staying safe and keeping on, making music and doing your thing. So, to start with, let's look at what we get when you first turn on FL Studio, and this is what we see. Usually, you can actually change this. There's a whole set and separate sense of templates inside FL, and these are all files that exist in a folder that you can alter. And I do, but this is what it looks like when you turn it on by default and you choose the empty project. Has nothing doing, nothing going on, and it is free for us to put on some stuff and do some things. I have the chats going on the side here, people looking it up, and near the end of this whole hour today, we're going to be doing a Q&A as well, where I will answer questions from the stream. So let's do some things. So this here is sort of the core meat of FL. There's a lot of other everything you can think to do, but this is where we put all the things that we use to do stuff with. So, for example, if we think to ourselves, let's get ourselves some drums. We want to go to packs over here in the browser. The browser is also something that you can customize heavily, but by default, the regular stock stuff that FL is going to have is going to be in this packs folder. It's all helpfully laid out into various categories of things, and of course, the most basic one is drums. And they are broken up into what you expect to find in your average drumming kit. And there are also available kits if you want to have a more together experience. But if you want to piece by piece up some stuff, this is where you find the main jazz. You know what? That sounds good. I'm using my mouse there to preview the kicks and things, and that's just how I like to do it. You can also use the arrow keys to individually just run through the samples to make sure you're not missing anything. Looking at the chat there. Hi guys, how you doing? So we have our kick, and when you click and drag something and you drop it into the channel rack, it opens it up into a channel. You might have seen that there was already this channel. This is what these are, by the way, labeled channels. This channel is labeled sampler, and it's because this is by default what the sampler in FL is and what will open when you add a sample to the channel rack. You could also click and drag the sample onto the sampler, and it'll put it in the sampler. If you click and drag a sample onto a sampler that's already going, it'll put the other sample in there. You can also right-click the sample and do basically all of this from there. And that's a pretty good introduction to how FL works on most things, which is that there is not just the one way to do it. There is the 1,000 ways to do it, and the whole idea of it is that you get to pick the one that works the best for you on your workflow. It's a little bit like a video game having a different list of weapons, despite the fact that they may not all do kind of the same thing, and then there might be a literal quote-unquote best one, but really what it is that it's about the best for each individual player. And that's sort of the point here, is that we have a big old arsenal of like tools and ways and means. So let's actually start writing a thing. When you actually have a sample and you want to use it, you can start using the sequencer to trigger a sequence. By just average amount, I'm going to put in the 4 on the floor. And this is what that sounds like. And such. So this is just the beginning. You have your one channel and your one line, and then there it is. And actually, in most DAWs, this is almost like what you'd expect how it goes, because usually it's more of a track-based experience. And you can do that in FL too, but we'll worry about that later down the line. But the basic idea is that this is more or less where that lives, is that this is where all the stuff is, and then the thing you are triggering is also here to be triggered. Let's get more of our kit going. Hats. I like hats. Sure. Why not? Neat. So, yeah. A lot of this is, when you're learning it, in terms of like what beat does what, is a lot of trial and error. Lots of putting stuff down and trying it out and seeing what happens. And then you learn pretty well what does or doesn't do the job you want it to do when you put it down. And this is pretty accessible and direct. Looking at the chat there, making sure. Which genre are we doing today? I guess something housey. I wasn't really planning on it. Actually, I guess we're at 140, so why don't we do something kind of trancy, right? There's actually a bit of a difference between those two things. So let's talk about patterns and arranging patterns. So right now we have a pattern. You saw me earlier, I clicked on this thing up here. This is where the play button is, this is where your tempo lives, this is where the metronome lives. Let's keep it, let's actually bring it, yeah, why not? One like closer to the 120-80 range. But the pattern is a pattern in a song. If I click on song, nothing happens. And it's because it's not playing this pattern anymore. Now it's playing whatever pattern gets triggered in the playlist. This is the arrangement window. This is where you go to arrange a song. It's called the playlist because of how it used to work and be displayed in very old versions of FL Studio. But the basic idea is you find your pattern and you put it in the playlist, and then now here it is, and then here's your song. There's nothing happening at the moment, but the idea is you have more than one pattern and you can make changes to things. How do you do that? Well, by first you put down the pattern and you can just play them all in a row. And if you want a thing to change over time, you make variations that occur in the time that need to happen. And here's another one of these things in FL that can be done a billion different ways. And I'm going to show you a bunch. So the first kind of obvious way is with these green light selection options here. If you left click them, it will do this. If you left click and drag, it will do that. If you right click, it will add onto the selection. And if you right click and drag, it'll do this thing too. If you double click, it'll select all of them. And then if you have them selected, or any amount of them that you do have selected, if you hit Control C, and then go to a new pattern, which you can do by mousing over this thing and scrolling up, or hitting the plus button, or hitting that button. There's, again, thousands of different options. And then hit Control V. And then there's your pattern. Run out on a different pattern too. It's the same pattern because we haven't made any changes. So let's make some changes. Sure. Yeah. And because that's a smarter idea, I'm going to put him at the end of the line there. And then I'm going to copy that a bunch. So that little maneuver there I just did, that was pretty much CV, Control C, Control V, but there's another one that's called Control B. And this is true for most windows in FL that it lets you select things. And what that does is it copies and pastes the selection immediately after the selection, which lets you a lot easier. Also, undo. Regular undo, if you Control Z, will undo and redo the last thing you just did. But to keep going farther down below it, what you want to do is Control Alt Z. And then if you Control Z while having done that, it'll actually go through that whole list too. So Control Alt Z is how you make it to let you can undo more levels. Exactly how far down you can go is shown in this history window that'll open up on the browser. And then in the options is also where you can set literally how high the undo levels go. So, and what I did there was a time selection, which I did by double clicking on the time area here. And now we've got us this loop. If I played it, it would just keep looping. And then let's keep our time selection on that there. I've made a 16 bar loop. A bar is merely just the number of like these groups here. We have beats, which are the 4 bits that are made up here, which are made up of steps, which are the 4 inside bits there, which form bars, which come up in groups of 4. You might notice that that's somewhat common, the group of 4 thing. And that's a time signature dealie, and for the most part, every kind of music you're going to do is probably going to be 4/4, which just means that every bar is 4 beats of a quarter note. And that's what this looks like. And songwriting arrangement-wise, you're going to end up with this, a lot of 16-bar group of 4 repeating chunks of things to be the sections in your tracks. So let's say that this is what we like for our drums, and let's go do a bass line. So drums are samples, and they live in here, and you can find them. And the synths and things that make sounds also can be found here, but they also, like everything else, can be found so many other ways. So there's the add menu up here. Drop down, and you can see, wow, there's a bunch of lists of stuff there. There's this plus button here, which is that same menu. And then there's that, and that's what there. My personal method is to middle click into nothingness up here, and that gets you this, the plugin picker. This side is effects, this side is not effects, what FL refers to as generators, which is a pretty good thing to call like whatever synthesizer you're using that will create a sound that you're after. And if you have third-party things, this is where they'll show up too, and there's a way to do that. But a lot of FL stuff by default is honestly pretty great. Like one of the ones you get for free, I think, in every layer of one of the lower levels of purchasing FL, at least a producer edition, you get Citrus. Citrus is one of my personal faves. So we're going to use this to kind of make a baseline. Actually, it would be we'll get the flex after we do baselines. So if you know anything about me, I'm all about like synthesizing and synthesis and stuff like that. But that doesn't have to be you. You can go and find presets. Citrus has a lot of built-in ones. I made a couple, but I'm gonna do a pretty basic kind of like plucky bass thing just so that we can work through that. And that begins by making a saw wave, putting it into Citrus's filter. And this whole routing mechanism is extremely confusing to look at, always has been, but don't worry too much about it. Just worry about like the primary sources of things, because every synthesizer more or less works in similar ways. There's classes of large differences, but for the most part, you can kind of expect a regular kind of experience with it. I'm only assuming that's going to work out okay. So here's our filter, and we want to make a filter pluck. Pluck is a descriptive term for what it means to start high and go low really, really fast. And usually, like with your hand, that'd be kind of hard to do. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to trigger an envelope. An envelope is a term that's used to describe pretty much the in and out of triggering our thing's motion, like on a per note basis. So it's not really about like you're using your hand now. Now it's you hit a note, and then because of that, a thing happens, and there's that thing. But if I don't do anything, you hear that start to happen. By default, it gives you this graph into Citrus, and you can use it. But I prefer to just kind of mess with it in its empty state. But let's talk about what we're looking at right now, because this is actually going to be something that's present in just about every single thing that's in FL. This is called the line editor. And these are the lines. And this is the editor. And everything is going to have some form of control over it. Automation clips, the Maximus, all that stuff will interact with it in a way that's how this stuff moves around. So you add a point by right-clicking, and then there's the point. If you right-click the point, you get a bunch of options in the point. And this is where you do things like build it to specify to be an envelope. That sounds like, well, isn't that just what it is? Well, no, actually, it's only like that optionally. It's just there to show you that you can do that, but you don't have to. One of those options in the right-click menu is to delete a point, but that can get kind of cumbersome if you do it across the whole thing. And the line editing windows have this thing called step editing, and that's this symbol right here. This will show up on a lot of other things that have it, and what it does is that instead of right-clicking and left-clicking to put a point down, you left-click to draw a point, and you right-click to delete a point. And I brought that up completely because that is my method for quickly deleting things, because this takes a bit to do, but if I'm just like, okay, cool, do anything, and now I can start. Like, that's the whole reason I showed you that. So, again, a pluck. Start high and go low. How neat. So now we have this pattern and we have those drum patterns. So I'm going to take this pattern and I'm going to put them beneath the drum pattern as such. Now in the playlist, this means that our drums and this bass line are going to play at the same time. Cool. Looking at the chat. How are you, Seamless? I'm great. How are you? C-Ray Beats. Nice. Someone else said they were born in 61, but they still like synthwave, and good job there. Alrighty, so even if we're not yet to the part where we're talking about adding other parts yet, there's still bits of this that like don't sound right. Even just as a collection of there being drums and a bass, doesn't seem to really work well. And that's because of what's referred to as mixing. And the way that works in FL is that we use the mixer. And we route it into the mixer with this little dialog right here, which has the numbers and it shows us what's going on. And I avoided doing it yet because I wanted to show you a shortcut for doing it all at once. What you do is you select the stuff, and then you go to the mixer. there's two things you can do here. You can either do Control L, which will put every one of these channels into the one mixer insert you have selected, or you can do Control Shift L, which will put it into the consecutive mixer inserts from where you have selected. And then it'll also label and color them according to the channel label and color that's there. If you've done nothing by default, like citrus will show up as just saying citrus, and then, yeah, there it is. And if I colored this some other color, and it was like, and I was like, base, and then did the same thing. Bamp. Oh, it already labeled it, so it's not going to do it again. But if I did it from over here, just to, dirty project, yeah, cool. And then there it is, that there. So let's talk about the mixer. The mixer by default has some views. This is the one I prefer, the compact, but because we're in a stream, maybe not. It has wide, which shows off all the stuff. It has very large wide, and alternate, it has extra large. Bam. So you can view the mixer any of the way that you don't want to view it. Yeah. This is the one that I tend to work with because I can, see the most of what's happening. But if you don't have that much happening, then that's not super required. FL, again, is mostly about putting things in whatever shape that can most effectively work for you. Now, when it comes to making a track in general, like there's the mechanical method of doing what we're doing, which is what we're talking about, but then there's like the theoretical thing, like cool, there's how you can do what you want to do, but what do you actually want to do? And we're not really going to be able to get far enough into that when it comes to like referencing and things in this stream, but for the most part, we'll go over some like expected practices for stuff. So in particular, there's this whole idea called sidechaining. And it's in just about every kind of thing you're likely to do. Even things that aren't EDM based use it. That's a very, very powerful mixing tool. And the way that I like to do it in FL, which is again, just the one way, so many ways, is to take whatever element I'm going to sidechain and then route it into a mixer insert. So here's how routing works inside the mixer in FL. You have these arrows that show up at the bottom here, and by default, all of the mixer inserts are already routed into the master. But you can undo that. You can unroute it from the master. And you can do that by clicking and you can unclick and whatever. Or if you right click it, it has some processes that it'll do for you. Things like route to this track only, where it'll unroute it from whatever's routed and then route it to this new track. If you want to do that to multiple tracks at once, what you do is you grab them and then you click and drag, but while you're holding shift and control. In particular, you want to grab a track, hit shift and control, and then drag on the new ones. If you drag on the one you have, it'll unselect it, because that's what shift and control does in Windows. Yeah, so we're going to route this guy to just a track. It doesn't particularly matter which track, because if I want to move them, I'm going to name this one, all you got to do is have it selected, hit Alt, and use the arrow keys. And you can do that with a selection of a group. You can be like, yeah. So I'm going to route my base to the sidechain. Yeah. Now, again, there's 100 different ways you could think of your sidechaining, and like the actual official method, and not necessarily a FL official method, but like why it's called sidechaining to do this and not ducking, which is the result we're after, is because what happens is that we are going to change the level of a signal according to the level of another signal. In this case, we're going to change the level of the bass according to the level of the kick. But we have to get the kick into the sidechain channel and have it like, have its level read, but we don't want to hear it. So what we do is we route it into the channel and we turn its level off. If you right click a channel, you'll see these sidechain options, and that's exactly what they do. They do the regular routing, but then they turn the level down. And that's because we don't want to hear the level, but the inserts are capable of detecting the level. In the case of the compressor, if you go over here to the sidechain thing and you right click it, it'll give you a list of all the things that are routed into that channel. In this case, it's just the bass and the kick. So now we have the kick in there. Much better. And that sounds more like how we expect this stuff to sound. And that's pretty much why this stuff sounds that way, is because the sort of thing is sidechained to death and back. So the rest of the stuff can also be sidechained in various ways. My way of doing a mix in general, because the ultimate idea is that all of this is going to be arranged and to put up in such a way that it'll go into the master, where we'll limit it in such a way that it sounds like a thing that works. But the way I handle that is that everything before the sidechain channel is a drum, and everything that's after that is something melodic. And they all go into the sidechain channel, and then the drums all are just kind of in their own universe. So in particular, like hats. hats generally have an assumption for level and air. What I've done now is I've routed all of them into here, or I could turn them down a bit, and now I'm going to route this channel again, this guy, into its whole other track, and then this track is going to have a reverb on it. So here's effects. This is the effects slots section that exists over here, and you click on a slot, and it gives you the list of effects that are possible. You can go to that plugin picker thing I mentioned earlier, and then it'll be in here too. So I'm going to pick Fruity Reverb 2, Fruity's basic reverb. So this track, though, it's routed into the effect track and routed into the master at the same time. The reason for this is because most effects have two things about them. They have a dry and a wet. The dry is actually just the original signal without any effect of the effect on it. And the wet is just the effect. So if we route a track that goes into the effect and one that goes into the master and the effect only has the effect on it, then the result is that this channel becomes just the effect. And the reason I've done that is now, oops, that's the multiband compressor, fun compressor, not really required for now. Now that I've done this, I can do things like route the track, the kick into this channel also, and have it sidechain just the reverb of the hi-hats so that it can move around but not feel kind of like squished a bit on the main hats. You saw there I'm moving around the release time here, and all of this is very timing heavy. It's very much the kick happens and then there's a reaction to the kick, and how long the reaction occurs will change whether or not it feels like it's in time or not. So you want to kind of mess with that to make it fit. And if it can't fit, if it eventually, like, there's no amount of messing with it that works, it's because the length of the kick itself is the issue. If the effect of the change in level is a result of essentially how long the signal is, then if you want to be shorter than it, you either have to use a signal that's not it or make it shorter. And to that first thing I said, a lot of people will choose, in fact, to have a sample or even just a source of automation that is for this purpose that's triggered separate from the kick, specifically so that the behavior of the kick is not the thing that's in control of the behavior of the sidechain. That's an option. So many options. Looking at the track. Yeah. Looking at the chats going on there. Alrighty. So now I want to talk about adding in some more things. Now that we have this kind of bed of stuff, every new step you add that seemed like it took kind of a long time, we won't have to do that again for the later steps. So, like, for example, I'm going to add flex. And I'm pretty sure flex is free for all FL versions. And what flex is basically FL's version, like, idea of a Nexus-esque thing. It isn't literally like the way Nexus works, but essentially the idea is that a bunch of other sound designers made a bunch of sounds, and now here they are, and you have control over them, but not so much. And it's because in your mind, if you're this particular type of producer, like, you're diving for samples and sounds and fun stuff, but you're not really interested in spending that time making it yourself. And coming from someone like me, that sounds like sacrilege, right? But I don't particularly care how it is that you arrive at making the stuff that's in your song, as long as you do. And Flex is an excellent tool for this purpose. So, like, I'm going to make, like, an ARP. Black octopus. Oh, look, there's ARPs. Hard ARP. Pulsating eighths. Quick trance. Sure. Now I'm going to make a chord. And what are we doing? We're in E. Pretty high. Okay. Neat. So the way that things that are usually say they're ARPs, what an ARP is short for is the word arpeggio, which means you play a chord, but instead of you're going across the notes that are in the chord. So when an object has an ARP, like, in the name, it usually means it's an automatic thing where you'll play a chord and it'll just do it for you. Boop. And I'm gonna, let's see, major. My fives are wrong. There we go. Mortal Kombat! Let's not actually do that particular expression. Sure, let's do most off, for instance. that sound familiar? Actually, let's do something a little bit even simpler. Three, two, one. See, one of these minor. Can arpeggios be pitch bent? Maybe. Let's try out. So while we're in the piano roll, let's talk about how some of this works. So there's such a thing as a slide note. So yes, they can. And this is something. The slide note in particular is something that only works with FL stuff. The way that it works is that you put down a note and it modifies the note. The slide notes by themselves don't have any. They're not notes. But what they do is move a note. But they move a note to where that note is at the length that the note is. Like how long it takes to get there is the length of the note. That's how a slide note works. There's another kind of note, the Portamento note. This guy. And what Portamento is actually something that is a note that gets triggered. But what it is that it will slide up from wherever note it was last. At a speed. And that speed is set in the channel settings window. The channel settings window is something that every single channel in FL has, even if it's a third-party thing. You pick a channel, hit the big wrench icon, and then stuff. And then in here is like how fast stuff is when we do mono and Portamento and that kind of thing. I think actually inside Harmor you'd control that from in there, but either way, the idea is that that's what that note does, and it does actually play by itself, and it's just Portamento individually per note. And a slide note is just a modifier of an original note, but that only works for native FL stuff. It is not a VST thing. You might have noticed I clicked on this and this showed up. This is the note color system inside FL Studio, and this is how it handles MIDI channels. There are 16 of them, and this is so you can have something like Contact and have a whole bunch of different instruments and stuff loaded up on it, and then you can actually play within the piano roll all of those different instruments by making the colors different and being like, cool, channel 1, channel 11, channel 6, and like those are all triggering different things. So you can write whole arrangements inside just one piano roll. The slide notes won't do anything, but the real notes will. In newer versions of FL Studio, I haven't updated yet. They have allowed you to alter the colors of the notes. That might actually be a forthcoming update. Either way, though, that's just how that works out there. So when we're messing around with our ARP, the way that slide notes work on chords is that it'll slide the highest note. So if I were to play a slide note here, like it would slide this whole thing up one step. But if I played the slide note here, it would slide this whole thing down until the highest note became the lowest note. That's how the slide chords work. If you had different note colors, even if you're using something that's not MIDI, like different voiced enabled, if you do have different notes and different colors, the slides will only affect the colored note. So if you made a chord that is different note colors and they slide in different directions, you'll actually hear that happen. But if it's all one MIDI channel and one slide note, it will slide the whole chord in that channel. It's a fun time. Slides are awesome fun. Hell yeah. Rip headphone users. Oh no, I'm so sorry. That must have been kind of the high frequencies. Kind of loud. Yeesh. You know, I'm going to add a 7. See, we're doing E, so that makes it D. Let's put the D up here. It's minor 7, so major, major, major. Actually, I guess you are just the same as the original, because you're the same as the original. And then I'm going to change my bass line now to reflect this movement. Let's actually hear what this sounds like. And we'll take this guy now that we've put into its own mixer insert, and we'll put him into the sidechain channel. So we'll get sidechained along with everything else. Maybe I won't change the progression. So that's a writing trick we'll talk about in a second. But we might have noticed that the sidechain was a little too hard for the ARP there, and there's actually stuff we can do to mitigate that. The real truth is that, technically speaking, perfection-wise, everything should have its own individual sidechain property. But that takes a long time. And we have our one sidechain here, and we can do fun things like route the thing into the sidechain channel and route into the master. And what that's going to do is it'll essentially create a floor of level that will always be there, even no matter how hard it gets hit away by the kick. I tend to do that for lead elements and voices and things, vocals and whatnot, to make sure that they can still be heard, but still be hit. Like, you want them to feel the hit, so that it feels more coherent with everything else, A. And B, it's just an awesome sensation. Like, it just feels neat. So let's talk about automation, right? So Flex has a lot of internal stuff, but let's actually just a global kind of task here. This is the parametric EQ 2. Equalizing is like one of the deepest things you can learn how to do when it comes to mixing, and among the most powerful things that you'll use as a tool. It's very simple and basic, though. The idea of it is that you can see the behavior of the spectrum from low frequency to high frequency, basses and high frequencies, and then you kind of pick a note and you can hear the change in color of the sound while you do it. You might have thought when I was moving that around just there that certain positions made it sound so much better. And it's not really a technical, practical thing. It is mostly just that, like, it just sounds that way to you. But what that job of me moving around there is pretty much exactly how you learn how to EQ stuff. And then that sensation that you heard where you're just kind of like, ooh, 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 you want to learn how to listen to that too. Because what you do is you run it around and you go, all right, what part of that sounded better, and then leave it there, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. Me doing it just like that was entirely about memory, but that was how I got that memory, was that I sat around and trying some stuff, and then eventually I arrived at an average of things that I knew worked out well. It doesn't take as long as you think to do that. Like, you do that and you figure it out and you hear it, and then you're just kind of like, I'm just going to do that from now on. And then the not doing it way feels weird to you. Looking at that track. Going to show off some growl-based design with Harmora Citrus. Maybe if we got some time for that. I'm really trying to, go through just tool use with FL today. So yeah. The purpose for doing EQ stuff, though, actually has more to do with a mastering thing than it does a mixing thing. Mixing and mastering these days are pretty much the same idea, which is that we're trying to combine all of the stuff in such a way that sounds the hittest, the loudest, and the least destructive doing so. That used to be a separate kind of cool, we're going to set it up this way, and then we're going to master it. But that was mostly because the creation of the sounds, the mixing of the sounds, and the compressing of all the sounds together in reference to the rest of the songs used to be 3 different people's jobs. 3 different whole sections of stuff, because it was a band recording something, and you can't change any of that now. Someone mixing something, trying real hard not to change the band stuff, and someone compressing the master without trying so hard to mess with the mix. That just happened. As an individual producer yourself, you are all of those things, and you are going to mess with all of them. And honestly, I find that it makes it a lot easier. Baseline. So we're doing 1, 3, 1, 2, 1. Actually, I'm going to leave the 1 on that one. So I'm saying 1, and that's all scale degree stuff. That's what music theory is. When you play a scale, when I'm like 1, 2, 3, I'm just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that kind of thing, but just in the scale I'm in, which in this case is E minor. So I'm bringing it up to the 3rd note in the scale of E minor, and then bringing it down to the 2nd note in the scale of E minor to fit with what the progression was doing. I'm also just octaving it up, because I'm sure those notes are going to work. Somebody in the chat asked me why I don't go on all ahead to do a real track and make it sound like a finished total thing, and mostly because I only have an hour today. But yeah, And you'll actually see when we get to where we get to with this that it's not that far from what the real thing is. So speaking of getting there, let's add a lead element to this, right? Like, basically, if you think of musically what a song is, you can break it down into like its instrument groups, drums, bass, lead elements, pads, and stuff. But you can also break it down into like the voices, as in like there's the voice of the bass and there's the voices of this chord that I've created with an ARP. And this is essentially going to be like, for this section, what the song's going to be. And it's going to have all of the information I need in like what ends up being a chord, what ends up being a lead, and whatever. It's just what do those notes, do what those notes are doing. Let's make I have a harmony here, so might as well turn this into bam. Turn this into like a supersaw. Supersaws, probably heard that a lot. A supersaw idea is basically you play a saw wave and you play more than one. I'm using harmony to do this because it's particularly good in its results. Not form mutation. Nope, not that one either. Actually, maybe that one later, but first this. And then I'm going to make. So every given generator is going to have a lot of modifiers for a lot of parameters. A parameter in this case is things like this knob and this fader. And then a modifier is just what is going to happen to this value based on what? In this case, it's based on keyboard mapping. This is the literal note position will change the value of this parameter. And that's what's happening here. So that I'm making a supersaw that's a different tone for every note in my chord. And because Harmor has that, this is going to make it snappier, but Harmor has built-in reverbs and delays and compressors. And I'm just going to use that to beef it. And now I want this to move. So let's talk about automation. We've done a little bit of it already with envelopes, but now we want to do long form. Yeah, I try to say large and long at the same time, and I said long. Anyway, right click whatever it is you want to be a parameter that moves, and collect on, create animation clip. Anyway, this is what happens. I have a time selection selected, and what that means is that the animation clip will fill the time selection. If I didn't have it selected, it would fill the length of the song, which, like, in terms of what is happening right now, is this. It's just the length of the song is where there is the end of your content. So if I had a whole arranged, like, minute-long song, this would be the length of the track, and it'd be kind of annoying. But in this case, we can do it like this. So other DAWs, that behavior I just described of making an automation clip that's the length of the track is pretty much how you're supposed to do it. And then you just make the change per moment and then you move it around, that's whatever. But FL's whole life is clip-based, not track-based. It can be track-based, but it's not track-based. These are the tracks, they're there, and you actually can use them to load stuff into them like you would inside the channel rack, but that's mostly just there to give you the illusion that it is like another DAW's track-based system. FL's system is clip, and these are the clips. The pattern clips and the automation clips, the whole point of them is that they are what they are when they are. Like, I'm moving it over here doesn't actually change that it'll do what it will do. It's just now it's happening over in here in time. It actually doesn't change when I put it here. It doesn't change when I put it there. I could put every one of these on the same track. It would not change anything about the content in the clip. It will still be what it is. And if you want to change that, you have to go into the channel rack where it is actually pretty much like you expect it to work in that kind of track relationship. Where it's like, cool, here's the stuff, there's what it is, and now if I want to move things around, that's where I do it. Out here, though, it's just, cool, this is what that is, and now it's happening there, or there, or there, and it's the same thing. Does make no change. Does make no change. I forgot the part where I put the chords I just made in the pattern. There you are. Wee. This is the old parametric EQ. Not really use it for much. This one is visual. Fun. Looking at questions going around, looking at the chat. I like doing it. I miss doing this stuff. I really gotta do more streams. Anyway. All right, now let's make a lead. We have pretty much the informed pad of stuff that we're going to have, and this is how I make tracks. This isn't me being exemplative and being like, oh, we'll just make a little core loop. I start by making our core loop, and then when the idea is that I am establishing what the song will sound like, and how it's supposed to go and how it's supposed to roll, and it's because when I want to add new things, the question is always, is it doing it right? Is it good? Whatever. And that question is impossible to answer without like a reference, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if you think it sounds good, it is good, but that never seems to answer the question for you, does it? And it's because it's what good is a direct comparison to experiences you've listened to before that you incorporated into being how you like things. And if you figure out what those are, then you can move towards them, and then that's a little bit easier than trying to do it all from memory, which is usually the case. But starting from scratch, if you were to actually begin a track at the beginning and run through it, it's a lot harder than establishing what the song is going to sound like and then kind of working out from there. That is my experience anyway. So let's see what we got for leads in here. Synthwave, why not? This is kind of... Ooh, DX7 FM strings. Flasky, what does that sound like? Probably not going to use that, but I'm going to use it to write lines for notes. Or maybe I will use it. So that happens a lot, where like if just the fact that I hear the sound for more than 2 seconds will be enough for me to be like, I hate it. Wait, no, I like it. Oh, it's a song now. Still in that check. I just sidechained. I wanted to do that. That's right. Okay. So the thing I said before about routing it into the sidechain channel and also the master, it's a lot more common for lead elements to actually be more heavily unsidechained than other stuff. Last note should be the root. Yeah, I guess. I was trying to do that like kind of, because it comes back. But if it doesn't come back, it won't feel right. So you're right that should be the root there. Either way that works out. So it doesn't look like it much, but this is basically the whole song. And for this, actually, if this were being the real thing, I'd make a B part. And most of the time when we're talking about drop bass experiences, that's what is expected, where you'll have a 16-bar chunk like this, and then it'll have another 16-bar chunk after it that's kind of the same, but a little bit different. It'll have all the same parts. It'll have the same built-up things, but it won't exactly progress the same. And it's because it's basically like an interbridge. A real bridge is something so different that happens between parts so that when you return to the regularly repetitive part there, it doesn't feel that repetitive. For this stuff, though, it's mostly just that we're doing that, but right there. And in the case of this, normally that'd be something I do with like sound design and crazy basses, and that's sort of my style of things. But for this style of thing, it'd be a musical experience. Like this progression is kind of doing its deal, but now we're going to we would modulate it to be in a different position. Do I think I have time to pull that off though? I think I'll do it first with the chord dude. It'll be easier to detect if it'll work. So I could be like. Try to come down on like do the and then I can kind of run through it again. That could be a thing. About that. What I'm doing, deleting the key there. Control C, Control V. That was me making sure that all worked. So, and I bet you. Oh no! Now we have to make the basses match. So we'll do basically the same thing there. But now, here's a trick you can do in the playlist. If you grab a thing, put it in an empty track, and right-click the track, you can go merge pattern clips, and it'll turn whatever group of clips into one pattern. So now I can come in here and just do my C, D, making sure my notes are harmonic. That's 2, right? Yeah, okay. E, and then it's doing that 3-2 thing again. Yeah, let's keep it on the E there. Why not, huh? Okay. And then it kind of rides the E at the end there. Control B. I could have just done that there. Do people have questions while we're getting there? We're probably getting ourselves towards the Q&A segment. I want to cover just a little bit of crushing the master before we get to that. Yeah. All right. Like that, but the bass is too low. There we go. All right. So let's talk about actually doing a little bit of crushing of this stuff. So right now, when you the advice that is pretty common when it comes to this stuff is that we want the song to feel before we compress it like it would be the compressed version if we turn it up really high. Like we monitor really loud, we hear high dynamics, and we want it to feel the way. And then when we compress it, we want it to still feel that way at a lower level. That's the magic of making a thing feel louder than it is. I like to use Maximus, and Maximus is available like Citrus is for the most versions of FL. This is how I usually work it. You turn this button on and it lets you see the individual bands. And the whole purpose of multi-band compression is that everything is a time and levels based consideration, and there are different considerations for different areas of like bass and mids and highs, and they're all different instruments and stuff. So you want to have different consideration for them all together. But a little bit about how cool stuff sounds is for not being so careful. So there's one really quick trick that will get us to sounding kind of dope from right here without doing much else on these bands, and that is automating the release time. The reason for that is that how well it sounds with a high release, which is to say it takes a long time to release. It's kind of whippy and overcompressed and whatnot, but if we go too fast, we lose hit. It's loud, but it's distorted. So basically what we want it to be low when the kick hits and then slow when it's after the fact. So per beat, there it is. So it's something kind of like that. Now I'm doing this with Maximus, and it's the FL thing, but other compressors like third-party stuff like Ozone will basically do this automatically, and it's referred to as intelligent release control. And you get this result, where when the hit hits, it's extremely fast and sharp and cool, and then after the hit happens, it's nice and smooth and neat, so that the pretty things aren't destroyed by the loud things, which is like the biggest fight you're going to experience when it comes to mixing and mastering stuff. Now, we're going to go into doing the Q&A for the remainder of the stream here, and I just want to give advice for how you would take this and move forward with it to finish the rest of the song. I've left some room over here in the other 4 bars, and that's pretty much how things are going to be arranged, distributed rather. So this here, the very beginning, the first 4 bars, DJ intro. This is, if you hear most tracks, you experience the very beginning with actually no melodic content at all. It's just risers and kicks and hats and things. That's not really an artistic choice. That's something that we do to make it easier for DJs to mix our songs in and out of each other, which is one of the things that determines whether or not they'll play our songs. So that's what that's for. And then after that, we have another bar of what is usually the beginning of the progression. This is where we're first hear, not the whole progression, but like the first couple permutations of it. And this gets us far enough to make a kind of like feel for the song that what we expect to happen before what is the main parts, either the drop or the climax if we're doing transy stuff. And then after that, we do a rise section, a build up. This is the snare fills and builds and rise and all the effects, and literally put whatever you want in there, just automate an up curve over time, and you got a riser. In FL, there's also a bunch of built-in straight up like risers in here. I'm pretty sure courtesy of Black Octopus Sound. And they're fit. They're usually 16 bars or 8 bars or 4 bars long. And then that's that. They're there. And once you have this section going, like this is what your song looks like, you actually basically have the rest of it. Because then you take this bit and you repeat it. And this is the breakdown. This is what happens after you hit the loudest, coolest part with all the stuff happening in your track. It goes, it breaks down. And then it builds and comes up again, does it again, and then it ends. And then the outro is whatever you want it to be. Usually it's the breakdown again. But this is what the track would look like. And the value of having done this all stuff first is now we know the progression. We know the lead line. We know what the arps and the chords and the drums are doing, which means that all we got to do is put filtered, lighter versions of them in the intro and whatever. And if you have vocals, that's where they'd go to. Yeah. All right. Who's got questions? You can make an intelligent release controller, P controller, Maximus within the patcher, couldn't you? You totally could. The way that intelligent release control stuff works is that it essentially measures how much high frequency there is versus low frequency. The more high frequency there is, the more focused on fast you want, and the more low frequency is, the more focused on low you want. So if you make a comparator like that inside patcher, then it would do the job. You might discover, though, that the way that the peak controller kind of like adheres to stuff ain't great. And what I mean by that is that if it's fast enough to actually shut up and like turn on and shut up when it turns on and shuts up, it'll probably destroy the signal, and it'll move like the release control fast enough to distort what's happening. And when that happens, what you want to do, you link your controller, you link the peak controller, and you use smoothing. I never use smoothing for anything, and I like things being snappy. But in this case, it's too snappy. And pretty low values work, like 40 milliseconds down to like 10-ish milliseconds on the 3-pole setting. We'll smooth it up okay. It is a bit of a thing. And it's also beholden to your content and not your timing, which is what this is sort of useful for. Where like it actually doesn't matter what high frequency or low frequency content is happening. It's about the impact, which is that time-based thing. What is the duration of a loop you make for the bass for my song? It depends on the song, but usually 16 bars. That's like the first kind of iteration of what would be a drop. If you can make a thing feel good for that long, then chances are you've got a song. Because then it's all variations on that concept. But when I'm building it, like you saw kind of how it worked. I started with this 4-bar drum, and then I made a variation, and then I made a kind of a part, and then I made a variation, and then yeah, that's the build on these things. And that feels like the thing you do like when you don't have a plan. If you don't have in your head a melody or a groove or whatever, and if you did, you didn't necessarily know how to get there. Thing is, though, is that most of the music you've heard that you like was written this way. Because most people don't have time. Touring musicians definitely don't have time to like have plans and ideas. They do, obviously, because they're cool and good, and that's why we like them a lot. But they, generally speaking, they don't have that kind of time. So they do this sort of thing, and they extrapolate. Working on a progressive house tracks, things I could do to make my leads cut through the mix because my leads sound good to play it on solo, but not with other elements. Sidechaining. And I don't just mean the sidechaining that we did here. So sidechaining can work with anything, not just kicks. You can do things like, for example, take your lead element and sidechain it into stuff, so that stuff does stuff when it's doing stuff. And I used to do that for guitar solos when I do heavy metal stuff, because metal mixing is almost worse than this. It's all full spectrum, it's all very loud, and you want it to all be that kind of loud all the time, and the tones never change. So when things get added together and your tone changes, you can tell. So sidechaining the solo into the rhythm section is the only way that that works. How to make synth blend together as if they were one instrument. Okay. This is a consideration in spectrum presence. So when we have any given thing, like say there's a hat, okay, and it hits up this level, it's like, cool, that's how loud it is. And then like you have a mid-range growl, it's kind of there, and a sub, it's kind of there levels wise. If you have like 5 of these, like any more of or other ones, that's not what I wanted to do. If you just have more than one going, and one of them is this is the sound in this range, or kind of thing. If you add them together, this is why they sound different. They basically have different levels for presence and different level sections of the spectrum. So for you to make a match, basically just grab a spectrum, look at the thing, see how loud it is, and make the other one match. Make it so that, like, sure, it might not have as much mids, it might not have as much highs, but when it does, and you can hear its intensity matches the other thing's intensity, so that it all sounds like it's out of the same thing. That's a trick I learned from video editing. Color grading. Who's got, what's my mastering chain and how I master a track? My mastering chain has a Maximus. And that's a bit of that sounds like, oh my god, I'm so efficient, but no. And it's because the majority of my mixing decisions are actually mastering decisions. You saw me a little bit level like this kick, for example. And it's because I'm paying attention to how high this level is, how high that level is, and how high this level is. And the pre-I'd master of my mix would not sound good by itself, because it's designed to go super hard into a pretty big like limit. And that as a result, like a lot of the changes are here. A lot of my mastering actually takes place at the mix level, so that I don't really have to have a lot on my master chain itself, because the levels are conditioned to behave properly. Does Maximus have a sidechain input? It does not. Automatic intelligent, yeah, did that. Looking at questions, who's got stuff? I don't know how much longer we got going. I'm cool to keep going. I don't know what ADSR is doing. Yeah. Restream tells me the chat's ready to display messages. All right. Actually, one more thing we could cover is rendering. We actually didn't talk about that. So when you have a song and you're done and they're cool, this is my song, there's a couple ways you can go about telling it when to stop. If you hit Control R, and it'll ask you where you want to like save your business, and then you do, and then this menu shows up. So this menu is the render dialog for when you're making a track, and some of these settings here you would think are important, but some of them are not. This guy, for example, this resampling quality settings, it will determine how long it'll take a thing to render sometimes, but for the most part, this only takes care of anti-aliasing from only samples. So aliasing, you can look up what that is if you don't know, but this only takes care of it from samples. Synths and things all have their own internal anti-aliasing inside the project, but this is something that applies itself to samples, and that's because there's actually a live version of that setting in the regular settings, in the general settings in FL. And generally, you just want those two settings to match. If you've ever rendered a track and thought that it sounded different after doing so, this is probably one of the reasons why. And I keep it on the lowest setting because the live version, it uses more CPU for having more, and I don't really need it. So I keep it on the lowest value. Everything else, like waves and MP3s, all pretty much what you might expect on like quality settings for when you want to output stuff. Like highest quality is usually better. Although it's a bit funny, if you actually get to the position of actually releasing a track with a label, you might be like, wow, they really want a 16-bit wave file. We have 24-bit, we have 32-bit, but they want a 16-bit wave file. But this is where you set that kind of thing, and you can tell it to be what you need it to be. And then newer additions is that you can actually directly upload to the clouds and stuff, which is like YouTube and SoundCloud and things, which was not always possible in the F1. Anyway, that's the render setting. Oh, look at that. 420 minutes. That's how long it is. I didn't even try to do that. Yeah. Cool. is only Maximus enough for demos? Absolutely. You can do. I only use Maximus on my stuff. Like, I've used the other mastering plugins out there and third party things just to make sure that I wasn't missing stuff and that kind of thing. But you don't need more than what FL has to make anything you've ever heard. Can I use a preset in Maximus in the master for demos? Yeah. So there's presets and stuff, and generally speaking, a preset, especially for mastering, is never going to be right. But because of that stuff I said before about how I do all of my like big master changes inside the mix, you could actually start a track by having a preset compressor on, and if you just make every choice you make after the fact with it on, then you'll mix, you'll level, you'll write things in such a way that behaves correctly into the mastering. And this results in something that's basically like the holy grail of producing. You want a mix and a master that's made for each other. And it's super, super hard to do that after the fact. To be like, this is my mix, it's never going to change. And then you want to get everything left out of the mastering. That's really hard. And honestly, it's something we don't have to do now. Who else? Who else's questions? Anybody? I wonder. We're pretty much coming up on our hour here. Having a lot of fun doing this, that's for sure. Nope. Nobody? Well, I guess that's pretty much it for today then. That's a big old thanks for ADSR for putting this on, having me come out here and do this. I hope this was helpful. I hope if you've never seen FL, or even if you have seen FL, that you now have more and new information for making your stuff. And yeah, if you have any questions about this, please let me or ADSR know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.